The Russian mob boss came to collect my father's debt. He took me instead of money. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The silence in her father's study was a physical weight, heavier and more suffocating than the scent of old books and stale brandy. Valerie stood by the window, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, staring out at the manicured lawn she would never see the same way again. She wore a simple white sundress, a foolish remnant of a morning that felt a lifetime ago. Behind her, her father, a man who had always seemed larger than life, was audibly trembling, his attempts to bargain dissolving into pathetic whimpers. The entire room, her entire world, was held captive by the man sitting calmly behind her father's mahogany desk, as if he owned it. Viktor Orlov had not raised his voice once since he had entered their home an hour ago, flanked by two silent men who stood like stone sentinels at the door. He did not need to. His presence was a void that consumed all light and sound, his tailored black suit a stark contrast to the cozy, cluttered study. His power was absolute, a cold, serene ocean of danger. Viktor finally looked up from the ledger he had been examining, his gaze bypassing her father entirely and landing, with calculated weight, on Valerie. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, a striking gray-blue that held no warmth, only sharp, assessing intelligence. A faint scar, white against his tanned skin, ran from his jawline to just below his ear, a permanent reminder of the world he commanded. The debt is $4 million. Your assets, he gestured dismissively at the room, are nostalgic but worthless. Your bank accounts are hollow, you have nothing. His voice was deep, a deliberate rumble with a thick Russian accent that made every word sound like a final judgment. Her father choked on a sob. Please, Viktor Mikhailovich, a little more time. The horses, the markets. Viktor raised a hand and the begging stopped instantly. The silence that fell was sharp, terrifying. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to collect. His gaze returned to Valerie, and this time it lingered, tracing her form with an intensity that made her skin crawl, yet rooted her to the spot. She met his stare, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but she refused to look away. It was that defiance, that small, flickering spark in her wide green eyes that seemed to finalize his decision. You are right, Nikolai, Viktor said softly, his eyes still locked on Valerie. You have nothing of value to pay me. He leaned forward, the gold of his watch gleaming under the lamplight as he steepled his fingers. Almost nothing. Her father's breath hitched, his eyes widening in comprehension and horror. No, Viktor, no, not her. Anything but her. She is my daughter. She is innocent in this. Viktor's smile was a cold, thin line that did not reach his eyes. Her innocence is the only asset you have left, and you have already wagered it. He rose from the chair, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette that blocked out the light. He walked slowly around the desk, stopping directly in front of Valerie. She could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, mixed with the sharper tang of cigars. He was so close she could see the precise cut of the scar, the intimidating breadth of his chest. He did not touch her, but his proximity was a physical cage. He owes a debt to the Bratva, Viktor stated, his voice low, meant only for her. A debt of blood, but I am feeling charitable. He looked back at her father, who was now weeping openly. I will take her instead. Her, in exchange for your life. She will come with me now, and your debt is cleared. Refuse, and my men will clear it in a more traditional manner. The choice is yours, old man. Valerie felt the world tilt. This was not real. This was a nightmare, a scene from a dark fairy tale. But the cold assessment in Viktor Orlov's eyes was entirely real. She looked at her father, at this weak, broken man who had gambled away everything, including her. She knew with chilling certainty that Viktor was not bluffing. And she knew in that same instant that her father was too cowardly to die even for her. He would let this happen. The choice was not her father's, it was hers. She could refuse and watch her father be dragged from this room, or she could go. The fear was paralyzing, but the flicker of defiance inside her burned hotter. She would not be a passive victim in her father's execution. She lifted her chin, her green eyes holding Viktor's stormy gaze. If I go with you, she said, her voice shaking but clear, you will not harm him. You will give your word. A flicker of surprise, perhaps even respect, crossed Viktor's features. He nodded once, a sharp, definitive motion. You have my word, he will not be touched. Valerie took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of her simple white dress. She turned to her father, her expression unreadable. It is done. She did not say goodbye. She simply turned back to Viktor Orlov and waited. He gestured to the door, his hand not quite touching the small of her back, but she felt its heat all the same. Come. She walked out of the study, past the two stone-faced guards, and out of her old life, leaving her father to his tears and his worthless salvation. The drive was silent, the black sedan gliding through the twilight like a shark through water. She stared out the window as the familiar city streets gave way to dark, snow-dusted forests, the white flakes beginning to drift down in the gloom. She was taken. The fortress rose from the snow-covered landscape like a jagged piece of obsidian, a monument of dark stone and foreboding angles against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. Viktor Orlov's estate was less a mansion and more a citadel, perched on a cliff overlooking a massive, frozen lake that shimmered like dull steel under the rising moon. The air was bitingly cold when she stepped out of the car, a stark contrast to the heated leather interior. Guards were visible, patrolling the perimeter with a silent, professional menace that made the two men who had flanked Viktor look like amateurs. The heavy oak doors opened into a great hall that was both magnificent and oppressive. Gilded ceilings arched high above, roaring fireplaces at either end battled the icy draft, and the air was thick with the scent of old wood, expensive cigars, and something metallic she could not place. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor as Viktor led her wordlessly through the halls, his own steps silent. He did not hold her arm, but she felt his presence like a physical tether, ensuring she did not stray. He brought her to a large, opulent bedroom. A fire was already crackling in the hearth, and the bed was a massive, four-poster creation draped in dark velvet. It was a beautiful room, but the windows were thick, reinforced glass, and the heavy door had a very solid, very final-sounding lock. "You will stay here," Viktor announced, his voice flat. He walked over to a wardrobe and opened it, revealing rows of clothing, silks, cashmeres, and wools in rich, dark colors. Nothing like the simple, bright clothes she was used to. "These will suit you. Your other belongings are irrelevant." He gestured to the simple white dress she still wore, which now felt like a child's costume. "You will dress for dinner. My housekeeper, Anya, will be here in 1 hour to escort you." Valerie finally found her voice, the defiant spark returning despite the overwhelming fear. "And if I refuse, if I do not wish to play dress-up in my cage?" Viktor turned slowly, his gray-blue eyes pinning her in place. The casual way he rested his hand on the mantelpiece did nothing to disguise the coiled power in his frame. "Then you will be hungry, and you will be cold. Here you are my guest, Valerie, but do not mistake my hospitality for choice. Your father's debt was absolute, and so is my claim on you. Your compliance is not a request." She held his gaze for a long moment, the air crackling between them. She was his property, collateral for a gambling debt. The humiliation of it burned, but the reality of her situation was colder. She was utterly powerless, trapped in a fortress in the middle of a Russian winter owned by the head of the Bratva. "I understand," she said, her voice low. His lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. "Good, 1 hour." He left, the door clicking shut behind him with an expensive, heavy sound that sealed her in. The silence that descended was absolute. After a few minutes of standing frozen in the center of the room, she moved. She walked to the windows, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Outside, the snow was falling heavily now, obscuring the dark trees and the frozen lake. She was completely, utterly isolated. Anya, a stern-looking older woman with her hair in a tight bun, arrived precisely an hour later. She carried a dark green velvet dress that felt impossibly heavy and soft. Valerie, having found no other option, had bathed in the adjoining marble bathroom and now stood wrapped in a thick towel. Anya laid the dress on the bed without a word, her expression unreadable. Valerie dressed in silence, the rich fabric clinging to her form. It was beautiful, elegant, and felt entirely wrong. Dinner was served in a cavernous dining room, the table long enough to seat 30 people. Yet there were only 2 settings, one at either end, a vast expanse of polished wood separating them. Viktor was already seated, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. He wore another impeccably tailored suit, this time a deep charcoal gray. He watched her approach, his eyes appreciating the sight of her in the dress he had chosen, the dark green making her pale blonde hair seem brighter, her green eyes more vivid. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair. Servants, moving as silently as ghosts, filled her plate with food, roasted meats, root vegetables, dark bread. She ate, though the food tasted like ash in her mouth. The silence stretched, broken only by the clinking of silverware. She could not bear it. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Why me? You are a rich man, my father's debt. It is a lot, but it cannot be that much to you. Why not just take the money?" Victor took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim of the glass. "Because your father's offense was not just fiscal. He borrowed from me, Victor Orlov, and then he was stupid enough to lose it and arrogant enough to believe I would not collect." He set the glass down, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Taking his money would have been business. Taking you, that is a message. It is a lesson in consequences." His cold, practical answer chilled her more than the snow outside. She was a symbol, a piece of living collateral to make a point. "And what happens to me?" she whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. "What happens when you grow tired of your message?" Victor leaned back in his chair, the scar on his jaw flexing as he considered her. "I have not decided. Perhaps I will find your defiance amusing. Or perhaps," his voice dropped, growing softer, more dangerous, "I will grow tired of it. For now, you are here. You are safe from the world outside, but you are not safe from me. You will eat, you will wear the clothes I provide, and you will learn the rules of my house. The first rule," he said, rising from his chair, "is that you do not question me." He walked the length of the table until he stood behind her, his large hands resting on the back of her chair. She froze, her entire body rigid. He leaned down, his warm breath ghosting over her ear, the scent of his cigars and his skin enveloping her. "The second rule is that you do not try to run. There is nowhere to go. This estate is miles from anything, the lake is frozen, and the woods are deep. My men will find you before you take 10 steps, and I will not be charitable a second time." He straightened, and she finally let out the breath she had been holding. "Enjoy your meal." He left her alone in the massive, empty room, a gilded prisoner in his cold, dark kingdom. The days bled into one another, marked only by the silent changing of the light outside her reinforced windows and the heavy, oppressive luxury of her confinement. Valerie's routine was monotonous but tense. She ate her meals, sometimes alone, sometimes under the watchful, assessing gaze of Victor Orlov at the other end of the long dining table. She explored her permitted areas, the vast, cold library filled with books in languages she could not read, a grand sitting room where the fire was always lit, and the enclosed glass conservatory that overlooked the bleak, frozen expanse of the lake. Everywhere she went, she felt the eyes of the guards, the silent servants, and most Ophal, Victor. He was a constant presence even when he was not there, his power saturating the very air of the house. He spent most of his days in his study, a room she was expressly forbidden from entering. She would see him through the cracked door sometimes, speaking in rapid, harsh Russian on the phone, his face a mask of cold command. He was not just a mafia boss, he was the chief executive officer of a dark empire, and she was his most unusual, most recent acquisition. Her defiance had not faded, but it had learned to be quiet, to observe. She watched him when he thought she was not looking, studying the way he moved, the absolute control he exerted over his environment. He was ruthless, she knew that, but there was a strange, undeniable allure to his power. It was terrifying, yes, yet it was also stable. Unlike her father's chaotic, weak-willed blustering, Victor's authority was as solid and unyielding as the granite of his fortress. He never lied, he never wavered. He was exactly what he presented himself to be, a predator. And in this cage, she was, in a strange way, protected by him. This thought disturbed her more than the locked doors. She was his, and therefore no one else could touch her. The complex web of fear and fascination was drawing tighter around her. One evening, the oppressive quiet of the house was shattered. Valerie was in the library, trying to lose herself in a worn copy of an English novel, when she heard shouting from the direction of the main hall. It was not Victor's voice. It was someone else, enraged and loud. Then she heard Victor's sharp, commanding reply in Russian, followed by a sickening, heavy thud and a strangled cry. Silence fell again, heavier and more menacing than before. Valerie's heart was hammering against her ribs. She stayed frozen in her chair, the book falling from her numb fingers. Minutes later, the library doors opened and Victor entered. He was still in his suit, but his tie was loosened, and there was a dark smudge, like blood, high on his cheekbone. He looked not agitated, but energized like a wolf after a successful hunt. His gray-blue eyes found her in the shadows, and he walked toward her, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of her chair, looking down at her. She was trembling, her green eyes wide with undisguised fear. She had heard the violence, and now she was seeing the aftermath of it on his face. He reached out, his large hand surprisingly gentle, and tucked a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. The unexpected, simple touch sent a jolt through her, part fear, part something else she refused to name. "You are frightened," he stated. It was not a question. She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He crouched down in front of her, bringing them eye to eye. The proximity was overwhelming. The faint scent of cigars and the metallic tang of blood clung to him. A rival thought he could test my hospitality. He was mistaken. His thumb brushed along her jawline, his touch possessive. "He saw you. He asked about you." A cold, primal anger entered his eyes. "No one asks about you. You are mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified her, and it did. But it also sent a strange, dark thrill through her. He was not protecting her out of kindness. He was protecting his property. Yet the feeling of being shielded, even by such a dangerous man, was a heady, toxic comfort. What did you do to him?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on the blood near his eye. Victor's expression softened, though it was not a gentle look. It was the satisfaction of a king surveying his domain. "I reminded him of the rules. My rules." He stood, pulling her up with him, his hand sliding from her arm to grip her waist, holding her steady. She was pressed against the hard lines of his suit, feeling the warmth and solid muscle of his chest. "You are safe here, Valerie. Do you understand? The world outside," he gestured to the dark, snowy windows, "is filled with weak men like your father and foolish men like the one in my hall. They cannot touch you. Only I can." He lowered his head, his lips hovering millimeters from hers. She was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and a powerful magnetic pull. This was her captor, a killer. And yet, her heart was pounding for an entirely different reason. The tension that had been simmering between them for days, a volatile mix of fear, defiance, and obsession, was about to ignite. The moment his lips claimed hers, the world narrowed to the single point of contact. It was not a gentle kiss. It was an act of possession, a branding. Victor's mouth was firm and demanding, his taste a potent mix of expensive whiskey and the dark, underlying power that defined him. Valerie's hands came up to his chest, intending to push him away, but her fingers curled into the fine material of his suit jacket instead. Her fear was still a cold stone in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a confusing, traitorous heat that spread through her veins. He kissed her as he did everything else, with absolute control and deliberate intent. He broke the kiss only to look at her, his gray-blue eyes burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. He saw her fear, her defiance, and the nascent desire she was trying to hide even from herself. His hand at her waist tightened, pulling her flesh against him, leaving no doubt of his own arousal or the solid strength of his body. "You are mine," he murmured again, the words a rough growl against her skin as he kissed a trail along her jaw, stopping just short of the scar he bore. She felt the last of her resistance crumbling, not to his force, but to the overwhelming, undeniable truth of their situation. Her old life was gone, shattered by her father's weakness. This fortress, this dangerous man, was her entire reality. And in that reality, he was the only one who had been honest with her, the only one whose actions were predictable, even in their ruthlessness. He was the anchor in her storm, even if he was also the storm itself. When he swept her into his arms, she did not fight him. He carried her from the library, through the silent, shadowed halls, and back to the opulent prison of her bedroom. He laid her on the dark velvet of the bed, the firelight playing over the hard planes of his face, illuminating the scar and the predatory focus in his eyes. What followed was a slow, deliberate claiming. He undressed her with a reverence that was at odds with the raw hunger in his gaze, his large, calloused hands worshipping and conquering every inch of her pale skin. He taught her with his body the true meaning of the bargain she had made. It was not a gentle initiation, but a raw, emotional collision, a surrender that felt, paradoxically, like the first real choice she had made. She met his intensity with her own, her fear transforming into a desperate, clinging passion. She was no longer just his captive, she was his. The following days were a disorienting blur. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. The fear remained, but it was now tempered by a complex intimacy. He was no less of a monster, but he was her monster. He sought her out, not just for the physical release, but for her presence. They would sit in the library for hours, he at his desk working, she on the sofa reading, the silence between them no longer strained but charged with a new awareness. He spoke to her more, not of his business, but of the world he inhabited. He explained the harsh codes of the Bratva, loyalty above all, betrayal punishable by death. He spoke of power not as a goal and as a necessity for survival. She listened, absorbing the dark truths of his life, and in turn he would ask her about her old one. He seemed fascinated by her simple desires, her love of art, her quiet life before her father's sins had brought him to her door. He was studying her, and she him. The fragile peace of their new arrangement was shattered by his second-in-command, Dmitri, a stern man who rarely spoke. He arrived one afternoon while Valerie and Victor were having lunch, an uneasy truce holding at the massive dining table. Dmitri leaned down and spoke in a low, urgent Russian. Valerie could not understand the words, but she saw the effect they had on Victor. His entire body went rigid, his face becoming a mask of such cold, pure fury that she instinctively recoiled. The temperature in the room plummeted. Victor slammed his palm on the table, the silverware jumping. "Ostav nuz," he commanded. "Leave us." Dmitri bowed his head and vanished. Victor remained still for a full minute, his chest rising and falling, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. "Victor," she ventured, her voice small. He turned his head slowly, his gray-blue eyes flat and devoid of any warmth she had begun to see in them. "Your father," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "Your weak, pathetic father." Dread, cold and familiar, washed over her. What has he done?" Victor laughed, a short, barking sound utterly devoid of humor. "He did not learn his lesson, he thought. He thought he could sell what little he knew about me to a rival, my chief competitor in St. Petersburg. He offered information on my shipments, my safe houses, in exchange for rescuing you." He stood, the chair scraping violently against the floor. "He tried to sell me out. He used you as bait again." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Her father, the man she had saved, had just signed his own death warrant. And hers, she knew Victor's code. Betrayal was the one unforgivable sin. He didn't. I didn't know," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "Victor, please." "Please what?" he roared, his control finally snapping. "Plead for the life of the man who sold you, the man who just tried to have me killed, the man who put your life in jeopardy." He stalked around the table toward her, his face dark with a rage she had only glimpsed before. "The law of the Bratva is absolute. He betrayed me. He betrayed my property. He must be punished." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him, his thumb pressing painfully into her skin. "And what am I to do with you? Were you part of it? Did you distract me with this?" He jested between their bodies, while he sharpened his knife. The accusation was more painful than his grip. "No, I would never. I told you I knew nothing," she cried, the tears now flowing freely. He stared into her terrified, honest green eyes for a long, agonizing moment, the storm in his own warring. He saw the truth. He saw her genuine horror. He let her go, stepping back as if burned. "No," he said, his voice quiet again, but more terrible in its finality. "You did not, but he did." He turned and walked to the door. "Victor, wait, what are you going to do?" He paused, his hand on the handle, his back to her. "I am going to end this. I am going to deal with my rival, and I am going to collect the debt your father owes, the real one." The mansion was plunged into a state of high alert. The number of guards doubled, their presence shifting from passive sentinels to active, alert soldiers. The silence of the house was replaced by the low murmur of men speaking into earpieces and the heavy tread of boots on the marble floors. Victor was gone for 2 days. For Valerie, it was a special kind of torment. She was confined to her room, the door locked from the outside, a guard posted directly opposite. The brief, intoxicating illusion of intimacy and safety was gone, replaced by the cold reality of her situation. She was a prisoner, and her protector was a killer who had gone to deliver justice. She wept, not for her father. The man she had known was a lie, but for the hopeless, terrifying complexity of her own heart. She was terrified of Victor, of the violence he was surely unleashing. But a deeper, more insidious fear was that he would not come back. On the 3rd morning, the lock on her door clicked open. It was not Anya, but Victor himself. He looked exhausted, the skin under his eyes bruised with fatigue, and his jaw was dark with stubble. He still wore the black suit, now rumpled, and it smelled faintly of smoke and the cold night air. He said nothing, simply staring at her as she sat curled on the bed, her eyes red from crying. He walked to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtains to let in the pale, snowy daylight. "It is done," he said, his back to her. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Your rival," she whispered. "Is no longer my rival," he replied, a chilling finality in his words. She watched his broad shoulders, the tension he held in his frame. And my father?" She held her breath, unsure which answer she dreaded more. Victor turned to face her, his expression weary. "I went to him. He was in a cheap hotel, waiting for a payment that would never come. He begged, just as he did in his study. He wept. He is a pathetic creature." Valerie closed her eyes, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. "Did you?" She could not finish the sentence. "Did I kill him?" Victor finished for her. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, a distance still between them. "The law of my world demanded it. He betrayed me." "He endangered you. His life was forfeit." He looked at his large hands, clenching and unclenching them. "But I saw your face. I heard you plead for him, even after he sold you twice." He finally looked at her, his gray-blue eyes searching her face. "He is alive. Let him go." Valerie's breath caught in a sharp, relieved sob. "But," Victor continued, his voice hardening, "his life as he knew it is over. I have taken everything. His name is poison in this city. He has no money, no home, no reputation. I put him on a plane with €1,000 and a warning that if he ever sets foot in Russia again, if he ever even thinks your name, I will finish what I started. He is exiled, a ghost. It is a fate," he added softly, "far crueler than a bullet." He had done it for her. He had broken his own absolute code, bent the iron law of the Bratva for her. The magnitude of his choice settled over her, a heavier weight than his possession had ever been. He had risked showing weakness to his men, to his enemies, all to spare her the pain of her father's death. The debt was finally, truly paid. "What now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Now," Victor said, standing up, "the bargain is concluded. Your father's life was spared. Your obligation to me is fulfilled. You are free to go." He said the words like a judge passing sentence. He walked to the door and opened it, the guard outside stepping aside. The path from the room, through the gilded halls, and out of the fortress was clear for the first time. She was free. Valerie stood up from the bed, her legs shaking. She could leave. She could walk out of this dark, opulent prison, find a way back to a world that no longer existed for her. Go back to what? A life built on her father's lies. A world where she was alone, with no money and a name tied to scandal. She looked at the open door, then back at Victor. He stood with his hand on the handle, his face an impassive mask, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the deep vulnerability he was trying to conceal. He was letting her go, and it was costing him. She realized with a sudden, shocking clarity that her old life held nothing for her. Her father was a weak, selfish man. Her home was a hollow shell. The only person who had been honest with her, the only one who had protected her, even from himself, was the man standing in the doorway. Her cage had become the only safe place in the world. She slowly walked toward him, not to the door, but to him. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. She lifted a trembling hand, and for the first time, she initiated the touch. Her fingers gently traced the white scar on his jawline. "And what if I do not wish to go?" she whispered. Vickers' control shattered. His eyes closed for a brief second, a flicker of profound relief crossing his features before he masked it again. He covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm flat against his cheek, against the scar. "To stay," he said, his voice rough, "is not to be a captive, Valerie. It is to be my wife. It is to be the Paquin's wife. It is to accept this life, this house, and all the darkness that comes with me." She did not hesitate. Her old life was ashes. This was a new one, forged in ice and shadow, but it was real and it was hers. "I am not afraid of the dark," she said, her green eyes clear and defiant, but this time the defiance was for him, not against him. "I am not that girl in the white dress anymore." Victor's cold smile returned, but for the first time it reached his eyes, filling them with a gray-blue fire. He pulled her against him, his arm locking around her waist, and kicked the door shut, the sound final. He leaned down and kissed her, not with the demanding possession of their first time, but with the fierce, mutual passion of a new beginning. Outside, the snow had finally stopped falling, and the frozen lake gleamed under a clear, cold sun. It was not a fairy tale ending, but it was their conclusion, a dark, earned, and satisfying peace.